So the first question is going to be, there are several new features of HTML5, like inputs. From the list below, which elements are introduced by HTML5? So the first option is A, input with search type. B, input with text type. C is input tag with URL type. D is input with email type. So which ones of these, using the letters in the multiple choice, are new? And you can actually select more than one possible answer to this question. And the correct answer is A, C, and D. So there are several inputs that were introduced by HTML5. Some of them are input with email, URL, and search type. And although the input tag is not a new tag, and there's more information at the Mozilla Developer Network, the attributes that set the type of tag, they are new. So they were introduced to quite a few additional ones that provided more flexibility, more options when we are selecting the type of input that we're providing to the user. And there's a whole listing of them here. So some of them are new and some of them were pre-HTML5. On the right-hand side, we've got a spec of HTML5. So color, date, time, local, email. So these ones are all new. There's the HTML5 here on the right-hand side. So color, date, email, month, number, password, range, search, telephone, time, URL, week are all new with HTML5. So let's do a quick example of those email tags. So creating a form, so that we've got a form object element on the page, creating an input and specifying the type. So the type that we're specifying is going to be an email. And then I'm also going to add in a button, or we can just do it with an input. So this was originally with HTML4 as well. So I'm just adding in a submit button. So let's go over to the HTML. We'll do a quick refresh. And now I'm going to type in some text here. And when I try to submit it, the ones that are emailed, so with the input type of email, and I'm using Chrome DevTools, so you can open up Chrome DevTools, top right hand side, you've got the three dots. Under more tools, you can select DevTools, or you can click anywhere on the page and right click or press using a Mac Control and click select inspect, and that opens up the DevTools and allows you to inspect the elements on the page. So because this one is specified type of email, when I try to submit it, we're going to get that default message that previously had to be done with JavaScript, but now with HTML5, if this is not detected as an email, then you're going to have this little pop-up message that's going to indicate the problem, or that there is a problem with the content that's placed within the input field. So let's look at question number 2. And from the list below, which elements were introduced by HTML5? So input with color type, input with checkbox type, input with time type, input with range type. And again, there could be more than one correct answer from the multiple choice questions below. So the correct answer is A, C, and D. There are several inputs that were introduced with HTML5. Some of them are input with time, range, and color type. Let's take a look at some of those. And we're going to look at color. So when we do have color, we actually do get a color picker. So this was a nice addition with HTML5, because a lot of times before HTML5, we had to do this with JavaScript. So it took a bit of coding in order to have this type of interaction for users. So now with HTML5, we can select the type for the input as color, and that provides us the flexibility to have that pop-up that allows the user to have a color picker built right into their browser. Question 3, which statement is true for the placeholder form attribute that was introduced with HTML5? It ensures, so question answer A, it ensures a blank text within the input itself that disappears on clicking on the input. B, it ensures a blank text within the input itself that disappears when the input has a current value. C, it ensures a blank text below the input that disappears on clicking on the input. And lastly, D, it ensures a red text below the input that appears when the input value is not valid. So which one of these statements is true of the placeholder form attribute? And the answer is B. The HTML5 placeholder attribute ensures a blank text within the input itself that disappears when the input has a current value. So correct answer was B. You can add a placeholder by adding in the placeholder attribute and then specifying a value for the placeholder attribute. So this is a good way to indicate what type of content you're expecting within the input if you don't have a label to it. So we saw when we were running the code that we didn't necessarily know what the inputs were. So we had created the input for the email. We didn't have any labeling, so there was no indication to the user what was expected within that email input area. And that's where the placeholder can be used to provide that. So for this one, if we wanted a username, so it's just a regular text input. And for email, if we want to be more specific, we can specify that we do want an email within this input. So let's go back out to the content. And now we see the placeholder in action. So for the first input, we have a username. And then once we start typing, then that placeholder content disappears. And as well for the email, the same thing. And if we type some content in here into the email, and make sure it's a valid email, otherwise we're going to get that pop-up message, we're ready to submit our form content. And notice how the placeholder provides more context to what we're expecting for these input fields. This question also has to do with HTML5 forms. So what is the required HTML5 form attribute? So what does it do? If we use it on any kind of form element, the form can't be submitted if the element value is not provided. B, if we use it on any kind of form element, the form cannot be submitted if all the form elements values are not provided. C, it means that the client can't leave the page before submitting the form. So where do we use and how does required work with HTML5 forms? The correct answer is A. The required HTML5 form attribute means that if we use it on any kind of form element, the form cannot be submitted if the element value is not provided. Our first form input, we're asking for a username. So if we go into the index page and we hit submit, we actually are able to submit the form. And even though that the user hasn't filled out anything for the username or for the email, we're still able to submit the form. So if we have an incorrect email and we hit submit, then we do get the pop-up message. So this has to be formatted correct, but there's nothing preventing that from submitting the form if the form field is left blank. And that's where required comes in. So the required is an attribute that we can set within the form fields. And this is going to make it mandatory for the user in order to submit the form that they do fill out some type of value. And in the email case, we're going to have two different types of checks for it. So this is going to be checking to make sure that this is an email, a properly formatted email address. And then additionally, we're going to be checking to see that before we can submit the form, that we've got a value that's sitting within those inputs. So let's try to submit the form. We get the pop-up message. So that's from HTML5. And again, submit the form. Let's try. And we also see that we've got both tests currently working. And once we fill out the inputs properly and the required input fields have values, we are okay and ready to submit the form content. Question number 5. The ... HTML form attribute is used for defining the acceptable character pattern for a field. So which form attribute is used for defining the acceptable character pattern for a field? Is it field, field pattern, pattern, or valid? So A is field, B is field pattern, C is pattern, D is valid. So please select the correct answer and I'll provide you the solution. So the solution is C. The pattern HTML attribute enables us to select the acceptable character pattern for a field. So what pattern does is it's an attribute that specifies the regular expression the form's control value should match. So if a non-null value doesn't conform to the constraints set in the pattern, the validity state of the object's read-only pattern mismatch property will be true. And these can be applied to the attribute of text, telephone, email, URL, password, or search input types. So you need to specify on any one of these input types. There's more information about the regular expressions if you click the link for the regular expressions. So these are just different ways to define patterns. There's some examples of different patterns. So for the phone number type telephone, if we wanted a pattern of digits and we needed to have 3 digits before, that would indicate the area code. We could do this within the telephone format, and we'd be expecting that this is the user's providing an area code prefix within this input. And this one is looking for a 4-digit number, so we can only accept values of 0 to 9 and within a 4-digit pattern. So let's try that out within the telephone input. So going into our editor and creating an input type, and the type that we're specifying is going to be telephone type. And what they're going to be looking for, so we're going to be looking for a pattern within the telephone value, and we're looking for numbers from 0 to, how about we set 0 to 5, and we only want to return back 2 numbers. So let's see how that works and go refresh. So this is where we've got the telephone value. So if we enter in different values, we can still enter them in, and we hit submit, and this one is required, and that is also required. So we do need to fill out some content there. So what we see here is that we're not able to submit this form, and we do get that pop-up that please match the requested format. So in this case, we're looking for 2 characters. And again, it's not within the requested format because we're looking for digits from 0 to 5, and we only want 2 of them. So if we enter in 44, then we're able to submit the form. So that's how you can use the pattern in order to better specify the input content that you're expecting within your input fields.